Good morning, courageous boys and girls, men and women of God. I'm back and we're still talking about Elisha. But today, the courageous person is a widow, and the Bible doesn't tell us what her name is. A widow means a woman whose husband has passed away, who has died. And she has a terrible problem, and she goes to Elisha, the man of God, to find out what she should do. So she was very courageous to go and ask for help. Sometimes when we have trouble, we're not brave enough to tell somebody that we don't know how to do something or that we're in trouble. And it takes courage to ask for help sometimes, doesn't it? But that's what the widow does. Go to 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 1. And I'm reading in the New Living Translation because it's easy to understand in today's language. But you read it in whatever Bible you have, and it will mean the same thing, maybe a little bit different words. So one day, the widow of a member of the group of prophets came to Elisha and cried out, "My husband who served you is dead, and you know how he feared the Lord. But now a creditor has come threatening to take my 2 sons as slaves." So her husband and Elisha knew each other. In fact, the husband actually served Elisha. So he was a man of God as well. But in those days, if you didn't have the money to pay a debt, you actually had to give your children up as slaves to pay for it. So she is terribly upset, as you can imagine. "What can I do to help you?" Elisha asked. "Tell me, what do you have in the house?" God always starts with what we have, doesn't he? And we always have just what he needs. God will use what we have. Just like the little boy with the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he gave it to Jesus and it fed the whole multitude. Well, listen to what she has. She says in verse 2, "Nothing at all." "Well, except a flask of olive oil," she replied. And Elisha said, "Borrow as many empty jars as you can from your friends and neighbors, then go into your house with your sons and shut the door behind you. Pour olive oil from your flask into the jars, setting each one aside when it is filled." Now, boys and girls, you know, if you have one little thing of olive oil, you can only pour it into you can only divide it into so many jars, right? So what Elisha is asking her to believe is in a miracle. And sometimes miracles don't make any sense at all. So she had to be courageous to go ask her neighbors for help by asking them for jars and pans and whatever they had, whatever containers they had. She had to be courageous to go ask the neighbors. And she had to be courageous to do something that didn't actually make sense. In fact, it might have made her look really silly. So sometimes things don't make sense that God asks us to do. But we have to believe in our God. And when he asks us to do something, there's a reason behind it, isn't it? So she had to risk feeling silly and worrying about what her neighbors might think about her. But she chose to believe in the God of Elisha and her God as well. So she did as she was told. You have to have courage to obey, don't you? So her sons kept bringing jars to her, and she filled one after another. Now remember, this is one little bit of, she said a flask of olive oil is all she had. And she kept pouring one jar after another, after another, after another, until soon every container was full to the brim. "Bring me another jar," she said to one of her sons. "There aren't any more," he told her, and then the olive oil stopped flowing. So when God tells us to do something, we have to have the courage to do it. And how much blessing do you want? He said, get as many jars as you can. The olive oil kept flowing for as many jars as she had. As many empty jars as she brought to God, he filled. That's kind of an interesting thought, isn't it? Yes, what are our expectations of God and how much do we want? God filled every jar to the brim. When she told the man of God what had happened, he said to her, now, sell the olive oil and pay your debts, and you and your sons can live on what is left over. So you know that was had to be a huge number of jars for the olive oil to actually pay off her debt, which was going to cause both of her sons to go into slavery, and give her money to live on. It had to be a huge amount of jars. I can just see jars everywhere. So they sold the olive oil and they had plenty of money to live on afterwards. So anytime you have a problem, have the courage to ask for help and go to a man or woman of God who knows God, who can give you godly wisdom. And if God tells you to do something that doesn't quite make logical, natural sense, have the courage to do what God tells you to do, because God wants to bless you beyond what you can imagine. His resources are unlimited. I love you guys. I love that you're taking this time to spend with me in the mornings to learn from God's courageous men and women of the Bible, because we are courageous men and women of 2021. Yay! I love you. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye.